What happened on a remote Arkansas plantation during Thanksgiving 1857 challenges everything we thought we knew about justice in the antebellum South. The official records were sealed for over a century, but the truth about Solomon's case reveals a story far more disturbing than any court transcript could capture. In the pre-Civil War Arkansas, a slave named Solomon committed an act that would expose secrets buried for generations. This channel is only for those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of American history. On November 26, 1857, the Whitmore plantation sat like a jewel in the Arkansas wilderness, its white columns gleaming against the autumn sky. But behind those pristine walls, something had been festering for years. Solomon, a 32-year-old field hand, had served the Whitmore family for over a decade. Unlike most plantations, the Whitmore estate was known for its traditional Thanksgiving celebrations, events that drew curious visitors from neighboring counties. That evening, as the Whitmore family prepared for their annual feast, Solomon made a discovery that would change everything. While carrying firewood to the kitchen, he heard voices coming from beneath the floorboards. Following the sound, he discovered a concealed entrance to a basement room that didn't appear on any plantation blueprints. What he found inside defied every assumption about the limits of human cruelty. The room contained chains, but not the typical restraints used for punishment. These were different, designed for prolonged confinement. Personal belongings scattered across makeshift beds told stories of people who had simply vanished. A leather-bound ledger documented names, dates, and disturbing notes in Jeremiah Whitmore's distinctive handwriting. Solomon recognized several names, field hands who had supposedly been sold to plantations further south, according to official records. When Jeremiah Whitmore entered the kitchen at precisely 8:47 p.m., he found Solomon waiting for him. Witnesses later testified that they heard raised voices, then a sudden silence that seemed to stretch forever. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore discovered her husband's body 20 minutes later, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. Solomon sat calmly beside the corpse, making no attempt to flee or deny his actions. Sheriff James Crawford arrived within the hour, expecting a straightforward case of slave rebellion. Instead, he found Solomon pointing repeatedly toward the kitchen floor, muttering about the others who never left. When Crawford followed Solomon's directions and discovered the hidden basement, his entire perspective shifted. His official report, preserved in the Crawford family papers, described scenes that challenged the boundaries of Christian comprehension. The basement revealed evidence of systematic imprisonment and worse. Medical instruments suggested procedures that served no legitimate purpose. Personal effects belonging to at least 12 individuals who had supposedly been sold to other plantations were carefully cataloged and stored like trophies. Most disturbing were the detailed journals documenting experiments that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. Dr. Marcus Webb, the county coroner, examined the scene and later wrote to his brother in Little Rock, "I have witnessed battlefield carnage and industrial accidents, but nothing prepared me for what the Whitmore family had constructed beneath their home." Solomon's actions, while legally inexcusable, become psychologically comprehensible when viewed through the lens of what he discovered. The discovery created an immediate dilemma for local authorities. Prosecuting Solomon for murder was legally straightforward, but revealing the full scope of the Whitmore crimes would expose complicity of neighbors, local officials, and business associates who had remained willfully ignorant for years. The social fabric of the entire county hung in the balance. What happened next would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. Solomon's preliminary hearing lasted less than 2 hours, but court stenographer William Hayes documented testimony that was immediately classified as sensitive to public welfare. According to Hayes' private notes, discovered in 1943, Solomon testified in disturbing detail about systematic disappearances spanning 3 years. The evidence presented painted a picture of the Whitmore plantation as something far beyond a typical example of antebellum cruelty. Jeremiah Whitmore had been conducting what he termed studies in human resilience, experiments designed to test the psychological and physical limits of human endurance. His subjects were primarily slaves who were officially recorded as sold to distant plantations, ensuring their disappearances attracted minimal attention. Eleanor Whitmore's testimony revealed the extent of her knowledge and complicity. She described her husband's activities as scientific pursuits necessary for understanding the nature of the African temperament. Her matter-of-fact recounting of events that had occurred beneath her own home stunned even seasoned court officials who thought they understood the depths of slavery's horrors. The prosecution faced an unprecedented challenge. Solomon had clearly committed murder, but the circumstances surrounding his crime revealed systematic atrocities that implicated respected members of the community. Jeremiah Whitmore's business ledgers showed payments to local officials for discretionary services and administrative oversights that suggested widespread corruption. Thank you for staying with us. The most shocking part is coming. The truth about Solomon's fate would prove far stranger than anyone could have anticipated. Judge Thomas Brennan presided over Solomon's trial with the weight of an entire community's secrets pressing down on his courtroom. The trial officially began on December 15, 1857, but the proceedings were unlike anything in Arkansas legal history. Brennan made the unprecedented decision to conduct portions of the trial in closed session, citing matters of public safety and moral welfare. Solomon's defense attorney, Jonathan Pierce, faced an impossible situation. His client had confessed to murder, but the circumstances demanded a defense strategy that had never been attempted in a Southern court. Pierce argued that Solomon's actions constituted justified homicide based on the discovery of ongoing crimes against humanity. This legal argument challenged the very foundations of slave law in the antebellum South. The closed sessions of the trial revealed testimony that would remain sealed for over a century. Surviving fragments, discovered during courthouse renovations in 1962, suggest that multiple witnesses confirmed Solomon's accounts of the Whitmore basement. Dr. Webb's medical testimony described physical evidence consistent with prolonged torture and systematic abuse extending far beyond accepted plantation discipline. Most remarkably, Solomon himself testified with what court observers described as unsettling eloquence about his motivations. Pierce's notes indicate that Solomon never claimed innocence, but instead argued that his actions prevented future atrocities. He presented detailed knowledge of the Whitmore operations that demonstrated careful observation and planning spanning several months. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Hamilton Ross, struggled to maintain focus on the straightforward charge of murder while preventing the trial from becoming an indictment of the entire local power structure. Ross argued that regardless of the Whitmore family's crimes, Solomon had no legal authority to act as judge, jury, and executioner. The law was clear. Slaves who killed their masters faced mandatory execution. However, Judge Brennan recognized that executing Solomon would require public acknowledgement of his motives, potentially exposing the full scope of the Whitmore atrocities. The judge spent 3 days in private consultation with state officials, local religious leaders, and representatives from neighboring plantations before announcing his decision. On December 22, 1857, Judge Brennan delivered a sentence that stunned the packed courtroom and established legal precedent that would influence Southern jurisprudence for decades. Rather than execution, Solomon received a sentence of indefinite medical observation under the supervision of the state of Arkansas. This unprecedented ruling effectively removed Solomon from the legal system while avoiding the public spectacle of an execution. The sentence meant that Solomon would be transferred to the Arkansas State Hospital for the Insane in Little Rock, where he would remain until such time as medical authorities determined his fitness for society. This creative legal solution satisfied multiple constituencies. Abolitionists could claim that Solomon's actions were recognized as justified, while pro-slavery interests avoided the dangerous precedent of executing a slave for killing an abusive master. Dr. Harrison Mitchell, the hospital superintendent, received Solomon along with sealed orders from the state government. Mitchell's private correspondence, preserved in the Arkansas Medical Society archives, reveals his shock at discovering that Solomon showed no signs of mental illness or psychological instability. Instead, he found articulate, intelligent individual who demonstrated remarkable psychological resilience despite his traumatic experiences. The answer would prove more disturbing than any rational explanation. Solomon's time at the state hospital became the foundation for what modern historians recognize as one of the most significant cover-ups in Arkansas history. If you're still here, get ready. The final truth will change everything you thought you knew about justice, revenge, and the power of secrets to shape history. Dr. Mitchell's initial evaluation of Solomon lasted 6 weeks and produced findings that challenged every assumption about the case. His confidential report to the state government described Solomon as demonstrating exceptional intellectual capacity, emotional stability, and moral reasoning that surpasses many educated white men of my acquaintance. The report raised uncomfortable questions about the entire legal and social framework of slavery. More disturbing was Mitchell's discovery that Solomon possessed detailed knowledge about similar operations on other plantations throughout Arkansas and neighboring states. During their sessions, Solomon described a network of information sharing among slaves that had allowed him to identify patterns of disappearances and systematic abuse across multiple properties. This intelligence network had operated undetected for years beneath the notice of white authorities. Solomon's revelations prompted a secret investigation by state officials that ultimately identified at least 7 other plantations with evidence of systematic atrocities, similar to those discovered at the Whitmore estate. The investigation's findings were immediately classified, and all evidence was sealed in the state archives under orders that would not be lifted for 100 years. The true scope of Solomon's sentence became clear during his 2nd year at the hospital. Rather than receiving treatment for mental illness, he was assigned to work in the hospital's administrative offices, where he demonstrated remarkable skills in record-keeping and correspondence. Dr. Mitchell utilized Solomon's abilities to conduct discrete investigations into other cases involving systematic abuse throughout the state. By 1859, Solomon had become an unofficial consultant to state authorities on matters involving plantation abuse and slave trafficking networks. His intelligence and insider knowledge made him invaluable for identifying and documenting crimes that official investigators could never penetrate. The irony was complete. The slave who had killed his master to stop systematic atrocities had become the state's primary weapon against similar crimes. Hospital records from 1860 to 1862 document Solomon's involvement in investigations that led to the discreet closure of multiple plantations and the disappearance of several prominent families from Arkansas society. These families were quietly relocated to other states or territories, their properties sold through legal mechanisms that avoided public scrutiny of their crimes. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 provided perfect cover for these operations. Plantation closures and family relocations could be attributed to wartime disruptions rather than criminal investigations. Solomon's work expanded during the war years as Union intelligence officers recognized the value of his information networks and investigative abilities. Union Army records, declassified in 1963, reveal that Solomon served as intelligence operative during the final 2 years of the war, providing detailed information about Confederate supply lines, troop movements, and civilian support networks throughout Arkansas. His unique position allowed him to move between Union and Confederate territories without attracting suspicion. After the war ended in 1865, Solomon faced a new dilemma. His legal status remained unclear. He had never been officially freed, executed, or released from medical custody. Dr. Mitchell's recommendation for Solomon's discharge was blocked by state officials who feared his knowledge of pre-war cover-ups could destabilize Reconstruction efforts. The solution came in the form of a secret federal program designed to relocate individuals whose testimony could compromise Reconstruction policies. Solomon was provided with a new identity and relocated to California, where he lived under federal protection until his death in 1894. His real name and Arkansas origins remained classified until the 1960s. The final twist in Solomon's story emerged from documents discovered in 1978. Federal investigators found evidence that Solomon had used his new identity to establish a network of safe houses and support systems for escaped slaves and freedmen throughout California. The man who had broken his master's neck to stop systematic atrocities had spent his remaining years preventing similar crimes against newly freed slaves. The plantation where Solomon's story began was abandoned in 1859 and gradually reclaimed by the Arkansas wilderness. Local legends persist about strange occurrences on the property, but the real haunting lies in the documented evidence of how a single act of desperate violence exposed systematic horrors that authorities worked for decades to conceal. Solomon's case established legal precedents that influenced how Southern courts handled slave rebellions and systematic abuse cases throughout the remaining years before emancipation. More importantly, His intelligence networks and investigative methods provided templates that federal authorities used during Reconstruction to identify and prosecute war crimes committed against slaves. The sealed records from Solomon's case were finally opened in 1957, exactly 100 years after Thanksgiving night that changed everything. The revelations prompted a congressional investigation into wartime atrocities and Reconstruction-era cover-ups that had been hidden for a century. But by then, most of the participants and witnesses had been dead for decades. Today, the site of the Whitmore plantation is marked only by a small historical plaque that makes no mention of Solomon or the events of November 1857. The truth about what happened that Thanksgiving night remains buried in archived documents that few people ever read. Sometimes the most important stories in American history are the ones that authorities work hardest to forget. But some secrets refuse to stay buried forever, and some acts of desperate justice echo across generations, waiting for the right moment to remind us that even in humanity's darkest chapters, individual courage can expose truths that change everything. And don't miss our next video. Subscribe to the channel and enter the placelet, and follow other stories so intriguing and frightening like this. Click on the screen to watch it now.